Fellas, there's been so many UFC fighters that have made a transition to boxing recently, and today we're going to be taking a look at the most relevant and significant examples of these fighters. I'm not going to include every single UFC fighter that has ever transitioned to boxing because this video would probably be like an hour long. Please let me know if I missed any like significant ones, but we're going to be rating it from S tier, which is like the best of the best when it comes to like boxing, transition boxing, and then D tier meaning basically just hang the gloves up. You're terrible at boxing. Please never enter the boxing ring again. And yeah, we're just going to start off with Tyron Woodley. His rapping career obviously wasn't paying enough, so he had to transition to boxing. I'm going to put him in C tier. I still think he could give a couple people a competitive fight. He is pretty explosive. In the first fight with Jake Paul, there was a point where he rocked him. His fight IQ in boxing is quite questionable. He's very ploddy. Doesn't tend to throw punches, mainly just throws combinations, so I'm going to put him in C tier. There's a couple fights out there that make sense. I know he keeps calling for the Logan Paul fight. He seems like he's just begging to be on these influencer boxing cards now, but he hasn't really shown anything great. He's got a record of 0-2, one by knockout against Jake Paul and one by decision, so he's lost both ways. I just don't think boxing is for him. I think there might be a couple big money fights for him, but he's not a really impressive boxer, doesn't really have the skills. Again, he was never really an amazing striker in the UFC either. He just had great... He had the takedown threat, first of all. He was explosive, and that's MMA, that's not boxing. When it came to boxing, he didn't look great against Jake Paul. But I still think he could give people a competitive fight. So I'll put him in C tier. Tyron Woodley, never rap again. Hopefully never box again, but maybe he could box someone like Logan Paul. But even then, I still think Logan Paul has a chance of beating Tyron Woodley, but I'm going to put Woodley in C tier. Then we got Ben Askren. He has to be a D tier. Although, I will say that I was more impressed by his boxing than I was like his boxing striking than I was by his UFC striking, because in the UFC, his striking was terrible. The spinning back fist of doom. This guy couldn't strike to save his life in the UFC. Probably because all he was focused on in wrestling. I don't know why Jake Paul... I do know why Jake Paul chose him as his opponent, because he was easy to beat. But yeah, he should never box again. I don't care if there's money fights out there. Unless he boxes someone like Nate Robinson, there's no one out there for him. He cannot strike to save his life. I don't understand with Ben Askren. He's been an MMA fighter for so long now. Pretty much his whole life. He's been right at the top. He's been a couple fights away from winning a belt. How do you not learn striking at all? I've seen 15-year-olds who've been boxing for like 2 weeks with better striking than this guy. I don't understand. Has he got like a phobia of striking? I don't get it. I mean, he did look better against Jake Paul than he did in his UFC career in terms of striking, and there were times when he was catching Jake Paul, but I think that says more about Jake Paul than Ben Askren, to be honest with you. He should never box again. One of the worst boxers in UFC history, crossover boxing history. Yeah, he should never. And he also got slept by Jake Paul in the second round. So Ben Askren cannot strike. He couldn't strike in the UFC. No surprise. Couldn't strike in boxing. I don't think he's ever going to box again. I mean, isn't he like 30 years old with like hip surgery now? Yeah, probably never going to box again. Shouldn't box again. Fair play for trying, but striking's never been his thing. Ben Askren D tier. Next up we got Mike Perry. I'm actually going to put Mike Perry at S tier. That might be crazy. And I know he's more of a bare knuckle boxer rather than just a boxer, but he's had a pretty decent bare knuckle record, to be honest with you. He's actually had a decent record. He had the first BKFC fight against Julian Lane, which he won by decision. Fair play to him there. Then he fights MVP and kind of battered him. I mean, I expected it. I actually thought MVP was going to win that fight, and he kind of battered MVP. And MVP's a sick striker in Bellator. He's one of the best Bellator fighters out there. And then he goes out there and finishes Luke Rockhold in round 2. In fact, no, I'm not going to put him in S tier. I'll put him in A tier. Because, to be honest with you, 3 BKFC fights is impressive. But the thing is with Mike Perry, I'm glad he's found his thing. He's left the UFC, and unlike a lot of people, instead of dying out, Darren Till, he managed to find his own thing, which is bare knuckle boxing, and he's doing really good at it. I mean, he's got potential fights lined up. He called out Conor McGregor. I'm sure he's going to have another fight soon. He's found his thing. He's kind of like the BKFC guy. People watch BKFC a lot of the time to watch Mike Perry. I'm glad he's not one of these UFC fighters that have just died down after the UFC. He's genuinely alright at boxing. Bare knuckle boxing is his thing. fair play to him, and he's beaten a lot of people already, and I'm sure he's going to continue to go on a streak. You know, Logan Paul squared off with him. I think Mike Perry would destroy Logan Paul in a boxing match or in a BKFC fight, so I'm going to give Mike Perry an A tier. Needs to have a couple more fights before it's an S tier, but in terms of transitioning to boxing, he's done really, really well. Probably one of the best, if not the best, out of all of them. Next up, we have Anthony Pettis. I'll put him in B tier. Anthony Pettis was always a good boxer in the UFC. Obviously knocked out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I don't think anyone really expected that. But yeah, Anthony Pettis has had a decent boxing career so far. He had that fight with Roy Jones, and he beat Roy Jones. A decision winning on game bred boxing. One thing I will critique Anthony Pettis though is his business. Who calls their own promotion Anthony Pettis FC? Who thought of that name? Anyway, he fought on Masvidal's boxing promotion against Roy Jones Jr., who is one of the legends in boxing, and he actually beat him by decision. And yes, I know he was old and washed, but still, just because he beat him, I'm going to put him in B tier. He's in the middle. He's only had that fight. He needs to have more fights in boxing, and I genuinely think he could do well because he had decent boxing in UFC. I'd love to see him fight some people. Maybe a match up against Mike Perry, or maybe maybe if you don't want to do BKFC, I don't know. There's other people. There's other people in the crossover boxing world, but still, Anthony Pettis, he can throw. Beat Roy Jones Jr. on Gamebred FC. Fair play to him. B tier boxer in the middle. Needs to have more fights before he gets moved up, but he's a genuine talented boxer. Yeah, I'd love to see him fight again. Next up, Conor McGregor. Now this one's going to be controversial, but I'm actually going to put him at S tier because he's had one fight against Mayweather. But he boxed the greatest boxer of all time, or at least one of the greatest boxers of all time. 15-0 undefeated. And I know Floyd was pretty much close to retirement then, but that was 2018. We're not talking about 2023 Floyd. That was 2018, right? Or was it 2017? I think it was 2018 when they fought. Either way, he actually won a few rounds against Mayweather. And people are saying, oh, Mayweather could have taken him out there whenever he wanted. I don't think he could have. I think Mayweather had the better game plan because at the end of the fight, McGregor looked like he'd never put on a pair of boxing gloves before. You know, he was out of breath. You know, his defense was terrible. Mayweather was battering him towards the end of the fight, but he actually had a good go against Mayweather. And just because of that, I'm going to put him in S tier. Yeah, I'm going to put him in S tier. No one else has fought an opponent on the caliber of Floyd Mayweather in this list, so you've got to give it to McGregor. He didn't win the fight. He got stopped in the 10th round, but still put up a decent fight against Mayweather. I'm going to put him in S tier. I think he's done the best out of nearly every single crossover boxer from UFC to MMA, and I think he's got genuine boxing skills. He called out KSI. I think McGregor beats KSI, and after watching Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz, I think McGregor beats Jake Paul as well. I think he's got really underrated boxing. Maybe nowadays he's a little bit worse because obviously he's on the coke, he's on the steroids, he's got too much to worry about. But back in 2018, from the one boxing performance we've seen from him, I was really impressed. So McGregor, I'm going with S tier. Next up we got Tito Ortiz, another D tier. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I think his controller disconnected when he fought Anderson Silva. It looked at the knockout that Anderson Silva gave to Tito Ortiz was so weird. It was like he hit him, and Tito decided if he wanted to get slept. It looked a bit fake, to be honest with you. I'm not saying it is fake. I'm just saying it looked fake. But yeah, he should never box again. He looked terrible. He looked really slow. Ben Askren could probably beat him in a fight, to be honest with you. However, I would like to see Tito Ortiz versus Chael Sonnen, because Chael Sonnen said if he was to box one person, it would be Tito Ortiz, and I'm actually down for that fight. I really want to see that. Maybe on like, I don't know, Misfits main event, but still, Tito Ortiz cannot throw. And yes, it was against Anderson Silva, and Anderson Silva knocked him out, but still, he looked terrible. It looked like he was... Like, do you know when you get boxing games or UFC games and they kind of give you the tutorial kind of punching bag to learn combinations on? That kind of reminds me of Tito Ortiz. He's in there so that Anderson Silva can kind of learn combinations. He's a punching bag. Tito Ortiz, please never box again. Anyway, next up we have Anderson Silva. I'm going to put him in A tier. I'm going to put him above Mike Perry. The only thing that's stopping him from being in S tier is actually the fact that he didn't beat Jake Paul. But apart from that, I'm going to put him in S tier. He's actually had a really successful crossover career, to be honest with you. He's had a really successful... Obviously, he boxed against Julio Chavez Jr., which is a legitimate opponent, genuinely. Anderson shouldn't have won that fight, and he won by split decision, and he's still old at this point. Anderson Silva coming into this fight was still old. This was an old washed Anderson Silva, whatever you want to say, and he still beat him. Then he boxes Tito Ortiz, obviously knocks him out in the first round. I think everyone expected that because he kind of got given Tito Ortiz. And then he had another boxing match, and then he had a draw. And then he boxed Jake Paul. And to be honest, up-and-coming boxer Jake Paul, whatever you want to say, Anderson Silva was old, looked all right against Jake Paul, but he's obviously looked better in other fights. But Anderson Silva, I'll put him in A tier. I think he beats the majority of the people on this list. I think he genuinely beats the majority of the people on this list. And to say that he's old and washed, whatever you want to say, he can genuinely box. And he's one of the best strikers to grace UFC or to grace the MMA community. Honestly, Anderson Silva, A tier. I'd love to see him box again. I don't know if he's retired or not, because he hasn't fought since the Jake Paul fight. So maybe he's retired, but I'd love to see him fight again, honestly, because he's genuinely alright. Yeah, Anderson Silva, A tier. Fair play to the journey. Next up we got Jeremy Stephens. Who the fuck is that guy? Jeremy Stephens. I'll put him in C tier. Yeah, I'll put Jeremy Stephens in C tier. He's only really known because of the McGregor thing. He boxed against Jose Aldo in Gamebred Boxing, which ended in a draw. And to be honest with you, fair play to Jeremy Stephens, because that was Jose Aldo's first fight after leaving the UFC. And I expected Aldo to knock him out and get him out there quickly, but that just wasn't the case. He actually managed to take him to a decision, so fair play to him. And then he boxed Chris Avila, and Chris Avila is very, very underrated. He's actually battered a lot of people. Chris Avila is genuinely a good boxer. He's better than Nate Diaz. I think Chris Avila beats Jake Paul, but he lost to Chris Avila by decision. But the fact that he took Aldo to a decision, and the fact he hasn't been stopped yet, and he didn't have terrible hands in the UFC. You know, when he TKOs people, they don't move. I'm gonna put him in C tier, same level as Tyron Woodley. He hasn't won a fight, so I can't put him in B tier like Anthony Pettis. Never mind won a fight. Anthony Pettis beat a legitimate boxer, old washed boxer, whatever you want to say. He beat him. Jeremy Stephens hasn't done that, so I'll put him in C tier. I want to see him box again. Maybe maybe he takes a trip to BKFC and boxes John Dodson or something. I don't know. Maybe he even boxes Anthony Pettis. But I think Anthony Pettis is massive now. Isn't he like a middleweight? I don't know what he weighs in at, but I swear he's huge now. Either way, Jeremy Stephens, decent boxing career so far. Nothing too impressive. Needs a win, but I'm impressed from what he's done all right. And then finally, we've got Nate Diaz, Stockton's own. I'll put him in C tier. He's had a fight against Jake Paul. He's never been a terrible boxer. He's always been quite He's always been quite smart in fights. Tends to kind of just let people rain on him, and then as the fight goes on, when they're all gassed out, that's when he kind of shines. He's never been a terrible boxer. He's got an insane chin, one of the best chins to grace the UFC, or to grace MMA, whatever you want to say. He had one fight against Jake Paul and lost by decision, but just because of the guillotine he put on Jake Paul and the attempted single leg takedown, you got to put him in C tier. He would destroy Ben Askren, probably destroys Tito Ortiz. I could even see him beating like a Tyron Woodley. It's really weird with Nate Diaz because when you watch him box and hit pads, he looks terrible. He looks like he's never put on a pair of boxing gloves in his life. He looks genuinely terrible. But then whenever he fights people, whether it be McGregor or Jake Paul or whoever he's boxing, he actually looks alright. He actually looks decent. I don't know what it is. He's got this really weird style where he looks bad but does good. So you got to give it to him. I think he could beat a lot of these people in boxing. But yeah, I'll put him in C tier. Never really been an insane boxer. More of a jiu-jitsu guy. But who knows, maybe he has another boxing match. I don't think he'll fully be done from boxing. He did tweet out saying he wants to box again, so fair play to him, but I'm going to put Diaz in C tier. But this is my official UFC to boxing transformation, I don't know what you want to call it, transition tier list. Please let me know if you agree with any of these or disagree, and yeah, thank you for watching.